Right, I'm Juliet Colman. I'm the Director of SecurityWomen, and I'm delighted to be moderating this event. And we have a panel of distinguished speakers who between them have a wealth of experience and knowledge. We are focusing on women's leadership in peacekeeping. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said at the beginning of this year's CSW, male-dominated teams will come up with male-dominated solutions. This is very relevant to every aspect of life, but is particularly relevant to peacekeeping. And we will hear today some stories which illustrate the importance of having women operating as peacekeepers in fragile and post-conflict areas. Last year was 20 years since the adoption of Security Council Resolution 1325. This committed member states to promote the participation of women in decision-making, in conflict resolution and peace building. It also committed to expand the role and contribution of women in UN field-based operations and to integrate gender perspectives and training into peacekeeping. But where are we now? What has worked? What has not worked? And why? The biographies of our speakers are on the platform, but let me just briefly introduce them. First of all, Ann-Kristin Kvile Koval is a hugely experienced police professional from Norway. She has served on many peacekeeping missions from East Timor, Lebanon, and Afghanistan, and was head of command in the UN peacekeeping mission in Cyprus at a time when all three sectors, civil, military and police, were headed by women. She is now responsible for pre-deployment and crisis management training at the Norwegian Police University College. Our second speaker is Rachel Grimes, retired Lieutenant Colonel, has frontline experience as a member of the UK Army. From her experience has been from Northern Ireland to Bosnia, Afghanistan and Iraq, and also the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where she deployed as intelligence analyst and then gender advisor to the UN peacekeeping mission there. She left the army last year with 28 years experience and now works as the NATO liaison officer to the UN and international NGOs. Our next speaker is Lieutenant Colonel Seitebatso Pearl Block, is a Lieutenant Colonel in the South African National Defence Force. Currently, she is Communications Officer for Peacekeeping at the headquarters in Pretoria, but has first-hand experience of being part of a peacekeeping operation in the DRC and was recipient of the UN UN Military Gender Advocate of the Year in 2017 for her initiative in tackling gender-based violence and child soldier recruitment. And our final speaker on the panel is Andrew Carpenter, and he works in the New York-based UN Department of Peace Operations. He is head of the Strategic Policy and Development section within the Police Division, and is also one of the managers for the UN system-wide global focal point for rule of law. Previously, he worked for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe as strategic head of police matters based in Vienna, and prior to that, held political advisor and planning and training roles in Belarus and Kosovo, respectively. So, can I turn to you first, Ann-Kristin, and ask you the first question. Having been the head of peacekeeping in Cyprus, where the other senior peacekeeping roles were also held by women, does the culture of peacekeeping change with women at the helm? And how do you get male buy-in?
Thank you, Juliet. I hope that you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes, very good. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And I do believe we female leaders bring another aspect to the leadership and the role of leading. Gender perspective are a natural part when women are in leading roles. We do not need a paper telling us we have to bring gender perspectives into all levels of leadership because we are female. My experience, especially from Cyprus, also told me that when there is a woman in leadership position, I got more women to apply for mid-level positions. Female colleagues see here is a woman on the top level, and therefore it might be not as scary to apply themselves. They know they will be met in interview situation and during the assessment in the process by a woman. I also saw in Cyprus that I had female officer which had tried to motivate to apply for sector commanders and other positions, and they did. And I think one of the reasons was that they knew I was there, they knew I would be part of the assessment, and that an application from them will not be met by laughter and negative comments. So, but it's not just easy to get female to apply. Sometimes you need to talk to them, to motivate them, to give them the possibility to apply in a very male, not society, but in the UN mission, there is of course more male police officers than female. So also we must not forget that many of these female colleagues of mine, they come from member states where in the sector, security sector or the police service is not that many female in leadership position back home. So for them to come to a UN mission, to see the leadership are done by women, it gives them a specific motivation. So how to get the male buy-in? Well, I must honestly admit this is a huge challenge. And it was also a challenge during my experience in UN missions, not only in Cyprus, but also in other mission areas. I tried many different ways. Some successful, other not that successful, I must admit. But if you come with, you keep your integrity, you keep the professional integrity that you definitely have, and you do your homework. What do I mean doing my homework? When I was deployed as a head of police component in Cyprus, I had several UN missions from before. So I knew the UN system. I didn't have to learn it while deployed to Cyprus, because in the UN mission, you don't have any overlapping with the former boss. So you just come there and you have to deliver after the first hour in the chair. But I had been in missions before, I had done my homework, and therefore it was easier for me as a leader to start deliver the first day in office. So, and with all of this, you do your homework, you know what you are doing, you know kind of the environment you are going into. It's maybe a good way, together with keeping your very professional integrity, to also get the male buy-in. It is a challenge because we come from many different police services all around the world. In some mission areas, you can actually be a commander of 40, 50 nations from all over the world. So, and then you have the culture diversity and everything on top of being just a leader, and then being a woman, which maybe not necessarily all your colleagues are used to. It is a challenge. It really is.
Thank you very much, Ann-Kristin. It seems to me you have to be quite an exceptional person to take all that on. If I could turn to Rachel now. Rachel, can you give us a picture of what you experienced going on a UN peacekeeping mission? What your objectives were and the difficulties you encountered, and can you tell us what you achieved? Thank you.
Great. Hello, can everybody hear me? Sorry. Yeah. Okay, thank you for the question and thank you for being invited to talk here this afternoon. I think that the first aspect for me personally was actually just getting onto the mission, because within the British military you have to be selected as an army officer, and there's a lot of competition, and inevitably it's mainly men that are volunteering to be selected for this post. So my first hurdle was to get through the military selection board. And I know from speaking to other women peacekeepers that often there's a preference to select men. And I know that on paper, or I knew at the time back in 2014, that I had some basic French. I'd had some experience of exercises with the UN before. And so on paper, I looked like quite a strong candidate. But if you were to look at my sex, the selection board might have been a little bit hesitant to select me. I was really lucky, and that I beat off the parachute and the Marine officers who were going for the same job. But I'm conscious that actually I think that there was a woman involved in that selection board, and I'd sent an email to the selection board before I actually even was considered, and said, please don't look at what sex I am, but just look at the experience that I've got. Now, not everybody has that opportunity to write to their selection board and ask to be considered just on paper and not by looking at what sex you are. And I think for a lot of the countries, it is a real stumbling block to persuade male-dominated boards to start selecting women. There's various reasons for this. Lots of times the board just wants to protect the women, but also going on a UN mission can be quite financially lucrative, and there's a preference possibly to give it to people that you might know, or to men that you might know. So the first challenge was definitely getting out there, but I was super lucky and I deployed to the DRC in 2014. And when I got out to DRC, I was an intelligence analyst, and my objective was to actually try to get the force to consider talking to women as well as to men in the Congolese community, because it was clear to me, and I think it goes back to the previous speaker's comment about when women are deployed, they don't need a piece of paper to tell them to look for the gender dynamics. We're already thinking about it because most of us have experienced it. But it was clear in DRC that at the time people were mainly speaking to men, and not just men, but sort of men, traditional leaders. And so it was quite challenging to hear the concerns of people on the ground. So one of my first objectives was to make sure that we went out and we spoke to women. And I used that by asking the Tanzanian force that was with us to send women with me to go and talk to local Congolese women, because ultimately they had a familiarity with the Congolese culture and they spoke Swahili. So that's a big objective for me, was to get women to speak to women in their language and not to have to rely on a translator. And then when I was the gender advisor, my objective became something that I didn't want it to be a one-hit wonder. I wanted to be really confident that when I left, it would carry on. And I think that that's very challenging. And I don't want this to become a confessional place or platform, but I know that looking back on my military career, when I was in the UN and also in the British military, I've left and sometimes it was not consistent. I don't feel that I left anything that was strong enough to withstand people saying, well, she did it, but you don't need to do it. So it's a lot about being a strong personality. And so I wanted it to not just be that I'm quite obnoxious and like a bull in a china shop. I wanted somebody that was possibly a wallflower to come in and to be able to get on with the job and not to have the same resistance that I'd encountered first time around. And I'm delighted to say that 5 years on from my tour in the Congo, the British military is still sending out gender advisors, gender and child protection advisors. And I bumped into a young officer who'd just come back, and she said to me, oh yeah, I could see your paperwork, the documents that you'd written. She said, your name's everywhere, which I don't want it to sound like I'm singing my own praises. I'm not, but it was just so reassuring to hear somebody saying that the policies and the doctrine that we'd written back in 2014, policy, sorry, not doctrine for the experts out there, was still existing and that people could still refer to them. So I think that that's it. That's my main objective and my achievement. And of course, the difficulties are that you're in a male-dominated organisation where patriarchy is just a normal flow, and you're with lots of different countries, so your own country military might be on the road to understanding the women, peace and security agenda, but you will come across other countries in the UN who that's still something that they've not even been taught about. So you've got different levels of organizations that you're working with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I have to say that listening to you, it makes me realise how very recent any change is. That we've still got a hugely long way to go, but the change has only happened very recently. Jolly good, whoever that is. Do you mind putting your mute button on? Thank you.
Mute. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll turn to Lieutenant Colonel Block. Right. Pearl, you were involved in 2 peacekeeping missions to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Can you describe to us your experiences in peacekeeping, and in particular your achievements, and what led you to receive the award for the UN Female Peacekeeper of the Year in 2017? Thank you.
Good day, and thank you so much for giving me the platform. And like Rachel, I think, am I audible?
Yes, but your internet's breaking up a bit. But if you carry on, you should be all right.
Oh, okay. I think, and I believe that my experience is it's not I'm not the only one that shares such experience. There's a lot of women who deploy in peacekeeping operations. So somewhat I feel that the award is also dedicated to them. And my experience in peacekeeping operations has been very fulfilling, but it's been a bit of bittersweet because of what we experienced on the ground. So like with my first deployment, I deployed with the South African contingent, which is the battalion. And there is where I learned how to interact with the local population and understand the situation and actually see the conflict happening in the DRC. And I think that experience really empowered me going into my second mission, which was in 2016 to 2017 in the DRC as information operations officer and a planner. And based on the previous experience, I was able to integrate, bring a different light and different information to planning of operations, and understanding what especially the women in the communities are going through and how conflict is affecting them. I was able then to plan towards resolving some of those issues. And during that period, I actually learned that gender-based violence is very rife in the DRC. And with my second deployment, when we were interviewing some women, we learned that some of them really had sad stories to tell, some of which were that they are being raped as by the armed groups, there are the illegal armed groups, as a weapon of war to retaliate against the operations that are being conducted against them by MONUSCO and the local security forces. So after every operation, we would know that there would be some of the women that really had to go through these atrocities as a weapon of war. And it is during this period that I developed the bulk SMS project. The aim was really specifically to send key messages to the local population and more especially to the women and children to report gender-based violence and sexual assaults, and also inform the communities that rape is a crime, and you know, it should be reported as such. And with this platform, we were able to send the contact details of where these women, the victims, could report to and how they can get assistance when going through such. And the messages also, like you mentioned with the profile, it was also to encourage armed groups to surrender their weapon, because they were also going through those atrocities in the bushes. Because this gender-based violence is not only against women, it's also against boy children that were part of the illegally or forcefully recruited by the armed groups. And it is with this messages and bulk SMS project that I was nominated as to receive the UN Military Gender Peacekeeper Award in 2017, and I am so happy that I received the award, and it's good to see my friend Rachel, who was also part of the panel that nominated members from the different UN missions. And I must mention that conflict really has a negative impact on society in conflict-related zones, and not all these activities can be resolved by force. So whereas if you only have men, you can expect that all the planning and operations might just be about weapons and bombs and mortars. But if you include women in planning, and we need to be included from the beginning, not towards the end of the process. So if you include women from the beginning of the planning process, you are able to get more results and get more information from the ground and get more reception by the community. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that. So really, I've noticed in my experience that having women participation has shown an increase in also in women being able to report gender-based violence and other issues, and that's proven to be operational. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pearl. Yes, I mean, you've beautifully illustrated that women can really make a difference in peacekeeping and how very much needed they are. I'm now going to turn to Andrew Carpenter. And what I'd like to ask you, Andrew, is the UN is taking seriously the gender imbalance in peacekeeping and is looking for ways to help women in uniform get through the barriers to take on senior positions. Can you tell us about the work going on within your department to tackle this and what progress is being made?
Sure. Juliet, thank you for the question. Hello, everyone. I have to say up front, my answers are going to have a police bias. The questions for the Department of Peace Operations. So when we look at our uniform gender parity strategy, that relates to military, corrections, but also police as well. So we have the Secretary General's reassertion of gender parity. So I think the first thing to make clear is that we have not stepped away from gender parity. What we've taken is a step back to focus, to say what would be the intermediate steps that would be realistic, that the member states would be able to achieve. So in a second, I'll show you the figures for police. But one of the things we have to look at is, and colleagues have mentioned this earlier, the gender imbalance in these services domestically or nationally. When we look at police, and somebody may have more updated figures, but for many years, the Republic of South Africa and Sweden were at the top of the list with about 36–37% of their police officers being women. There was a cluster of countries between around 16 to 24%. So that, you know, is an objective reason to say it will be difficult, but not impossible, to get gender parity. And congratulations to Ann-Kristin and Norway. I believe this year's intake is predominantly female. If I've got my figures right, it's 58%. So, you know, so that question of the future is female. Well, it certainly is with regard to the Norwegian police. But again, there's an opportunity for the UN police to be more balanced than the countries which make up the UN. So one of the things that we have said is that we will prioritize what we call formed police units that include up to 32 women officers, so the equivalent of a platoon. So the idea is we're not discriminating against anyone, but we are simply preferring and prioritizing what we would describe as a mixed or gender integrated unit. And say, if countries can have those, we will take those in the first instance. When we're asking countries to make nominations, we're asking for them to present both male and female candidates, and to say those that, you know, do so will be prioritized. If technology works, I will just show you the figures for police. And if someone could just open their mic to say, you can see this on the screen.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Okay, so these are the figures for the various categories of police officers that we're recruiting between the start of this process and 2028. So as you see, these are, you know, steps which are manageable, moving us ever closer to gender parity, where we have the support of all the member states to do this. And, you know, one of the things I want to say, in that expression, these are not the ceiling. This is simply the deck. If we're able to have more women officers nominated by member states, you know, meeting the requirements, we will recruit them. And I'm happy to show the figures. This is what we have at the moment. So as you can see, we've not only met the 2020 targets, but we've actually exceeded them in 2 areas. So, you know, the immediate criticism says, well, maybe these figures are too low. Maybe. But as I mentioned, it doesn't matter because we're still pressing on member states, working with countries to ensure that we have somebody with their microphone open. If you could close it, please. Moving ahead. So we're hoping to lead by example, and perhaps by 2028, we may have someone's microphone open. If they could close it, please. Thank you. You know, I think it's, you know, perfectly realistic to say that we may, in the professional category at headquarters, have gender parity by 2028. You know, colleagues and I are all moving towards that. To give you some idea of what this progress actually represents, this is the situation in 2009 for these categories. So, you know, they say the percentage-wise, we've increased 4-fold for individual officers, 7-fold for the formed police units. But one of the things I think in our quantitative focus, it's the qualitative as well. What we want to make sure is that women are represented not only in a quantitative sense at the bottom of the pyramid, but they are spread throughout all of the job categories and with the focus of today's discussion in leadership positions. because we feel that whilst there may be a quantitative hill to climb, when we look at our command positions, there are ample, well-qualified, well-ranked female police officers out there available to take these positions. So we value opportunities like this for the outreach to spread the message to everyone, saying, there are jobs, there are opportunities, and we are seeking well-qualified female candidates for these positions. And as you can see at the bottom, traditionally we had one head of police component as a woman officer. We now have 4. So to give a quantitative, we have around 15, 16 peacekeeping operations and special political missions. So that gives you, again, the percentage. We'd also say that the highest role in the UN system for police, the UN police advisor, has been held twice by, firstly, a woman from India, Karen Biddy, then a woman police officer from Sweden, Anne-Marie Orla. So again, we have that reflected. A couple of other things to say. Similarly to our colleagues in green in the military, the UN police division has had, a Woman Police Officer of the Year award since 2010. So we've sustained this for over a decade, and saying that this is a way of highlighting and valuing the contribution of our women colleagues, but not with regard to what do they do on gender, because sometimes well-meaning people, particularly well-meaning men such as myself, start to pigeonhole female police officers into roles dealing with sexual and gender-based violence, children, and other women's affairs. And that's not the case. In UN policing, there are no restricted roles for women officers. All roles are gender neutral and allowing both men and women to undertake the right job depending on what their skill set is and what they can bring to the table. So again, that award is for a woman officer's contribution to the implementation of the mission's mandate on policing matters. So if I just pause there for a second, and then anything else we can come back to, and I will try and get rid of the share screen.
Thanks very much, Andrew. That was really interesting and encouraging, actually. I think, so thank you for giving us the encouraging picture, which we certainly do need. And now can I turn to Anne-Kristin again, and to follow on talking about policing. Can you tell me, in your role as Senior Police Commander, can you tell us about your work in security sector reform in post-conflict settings? How do you create the development of a functioning and democratic justice chain where this is lacking? And how do you ensure the foundations for resilient societies are based on the rule of law and respect for human rights? And how do we ensure that security sector reform is gender responsive? Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet. If I could answer that question in 2 minutes, I might get some Nobel Peace Prize or something, because this is really a daunting task for United Nations and the international community. Working within security sector reform is a very important job we do out in the mission area, but in my experience, it's also maybe the most challenging one. It's just my point of view. This is really time consuming. Security sector reform must have a local ownership and must be local involvement in all levels. And in many of those mission areas we are deployed to, the balance between male and female in the bureaucracy and so on is of course not 50-50%. Security sector reform in the police and the justice section is often a very, very daunting task. The task might be to support a nation in a fragile environment after a very complex internal conflict, and then to go in and build or rebuild a big institution like police and justice. And maybe the institution have for sure been there for many years, but it needs to be changed according to international standard. It's such a big task. And remember that most of international police officers, they are deployed for 1 year. So in 1 year, you must understand the history, the conflict, the environment, the national laws, the national security services, the police, everything. And this is really not only a police task. To do security sector reform is an overarching task for all the components in a mission area where this is a mandated task. But there is a real need for female officers, officers with knowledge and experience to can actually go into the working groups in a job where the reform work is going on. In reform work, in my point of view, in the process, the beginning is so important. The start of building reform, that's, for example, where gender perspectives need to be on the agenda from the first written sentence. If you miss the start, it's so difficult to get back on the table and bring up the gender perspectives on a later notice, because then it will not be a priority. It is crucial to deploy female police officers in all levels when you deal with security sector reforms, especially maybe in the middle level and the commanding positions. So exactly that females are at the table, be at the table when the discussion and the process start related to any kind of reform, in my perspective. And it has been maybe one of my main topics to talk about when I deal with pre-deployment training, is that United Nations is not more or less what the member state give to United Nations. As Andrew said, it is so important that the member state starts to select and deploy police officers into the UN missions. And this is, as Andrew also said, it's a challenge in many nations, because in many of the member states, the numbers of female police officers in the right level, it's very few persons. My last comment is, we female, and myself included, I need a kick in the back. I don't want to say the A word, so I say in the back, to apply. I must admit here, and we keep it in this small family of 500 people or more, that when I applied for the task as the head of police component in UNFICYP Cyprus, I almost had to put on sunglasses to be able to put on my application form positive things about myself. I think this is a female's way to do it. We are looking at the job description and we think, no, I can't do this. No, I don't have an education in this one. This, oh no, this is too big task for me. Ladies, you are needed and you are more than good enough to go into the United Nations, to be deployed in all levels and to be on the table when the discussion of any kind of reform, especially and the security sector reform, is starting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ann-Kristin. That was very rousing, and I'm right there with you to say, yes, we need more women. And I thought your point was very interesting, that gender perspectives have to be there right at the very beginning when you're doing sector reform, security sector reform. So thank you very much for those responses. Can I now turn to Rachel? Rachel, I'd like to ask you, UN peacekeeping, as far back as the 1990s, has been tainted with the issue of sexual exploitation and abuse, which has clouded the performance of peace operations and affected its reputation and credibility. What leadership, in particular female leadership, do you think is needed to eradicate such sexual behaviour, misbehaviour, I should say? Thank you.
Well, far be it from me to question your authority, Juliet, but as well as talking about what do women in leadership need to do, I mean, we have to be honest with ourselves that sexual exploitation and abuse is 99.999% committed by men. So far, the UN has never had to send any women back to their units because they've been accused or linked to sexual exploitation and abuse. So I would slightly frame the question differently. I don't think that well, obviously, I think that there is a role that women can play, but I feel that we ought to look at sexual exploitation and abuse in a different lens from women, peace and security, because in the military, we're talking about a code of conduct. We're talking about decent behavior and standards. Now, I agree that there is a gender dynamic to this unfortunate and repugnant phenomenon of SEA, where it is, as I've just mentioned, it's on the whole, it's men who are the perpetrators and it's women who are the victims and the survivors of sexual exploitation and abuse. But I think that we have to have this conversation not within the confines of WPS or of gender advisors. I think that this is something that the military leadership, which inevitably is male, they need to be more understanding of the fact that this is something that is linked to every aspect of military operations, every aspect of military behavior. It's not something that's just in the corner. So, of course, women in the military can set a great example. I mean, I think I've read quite a few documents that say that the presence of women can improve the behavior of men. I know that when I was in Northern Ireland years ago, as I said, I'm a dinosaur, but I remember a member of a Royal Ulster Constabulary, the police who were with the army on patrol. The policeman said to me, your patrol behave differently when you're with them. Now, I don't want to be too essentialist about the power of women, but I think that he had a point in that two things changed when I was on that patrol. My soldiers didn't swear as much because they knew that I didn't swear that as much. And also, when we stopped and talked to patrols and checkpoints, the women in the cars wanted to talk to me because it was quite a novelty to see a woman in uniform. So I'm giving you a long-winded story, but I'm trying to say that I think by having women as military observers out on patrol, they will have some impact. I hope that they will raise the standards of the men that they are operating with, but we shouldn't have to rely on women for men to behave and meet very basic levels and standards. So that's my response to you. This isn't a WPS area. This isn't something for women. This is something that the male military leadership need to take on board as part of their day-to-day routine and business. Over.
Thanks, Rachel. If we had more time, I would question you a little bit more about what the UK military is doing in terms of behaviour. But we will move on, and we move on to Pearl again. And Pearl, what I'd like to ask you is, how do we change mindsets, ensuring that expanding women participation?
Thank you.
Sorry, we have somebody who's okay. Ensuring that expanding women's participation is seen as an essential operational enabler, part of the core function of peacekeeping, and not as a box-ticking exercise. Can you give us your thoughts and experience around that? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Based on my experience, I think most of the troop contributing countries to get the statistics, to utilize them in combat or more effective areas, So that has been proven to be a bit of a problem. Like, instead of deploying women to go on patrols, be part of the mixed patrols with their male counterparts, women are deployed and they just confined into the unit where they are being utilized as a chef, for example, or a personal assistant to the commander. And whereas on paper they have been placed as one of the troops that will go and do patrols, and that by so doing, this jeopardizes the operational effectiveness of the mission of the battalion that has deployed. But in order to change the mindset, it has to start at home, at each and every one's, the troop and police contributing countries have to start expanding women participation. For example, take women on exercises and empower women so that they are able to carry out their mission. You have confidence on those women. And if we start at home, where we put women in command positions during exercises, so that you are aware of the level of understanding and the experience that they have, they can put it out there. Because I feel that in most cases, just a random guy could be nominated to deploy as a commander instead of an actually capable and qualified woman. So if we start showing how good we are actually, and I mean, it's not that difficult, because like when I look at, for example, South Africa, first to deploy a battalion commander, female battalion commander in the DRC, Lieutenant Colonel Sokobela, she was the first woman commander of the Force Intervention Brigade Battalion from South Africa. And as you know, the Force Intervention Brigade is the only UN mission currently that is conducting Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, and she performed very well. She carried out that mission far better than her male counterparts have previously. And in the battalion, she had over 30% of women who were not only subjected to support the positions, but who were also part of the combat team. Some that they were able to go out and do the patrols, and based on that, her mission actually recorded the lowest amount of sexual exploitation and abuse cases, and it highlighted that she had one of the most highest mission successes, and she had high ratings in terms of contingent owned equipment, and that reflects positive, and it's proof in itself that women participation really brings change in peacekeeping operations. And we have to keep in mind that the communities that, the countries that we deploy to as peacekeepers that are affected by conflict consist more of women than it does of men. You find that the population, the majority of the population are women, but we choose to keep women inside our compounds when they are deployed. And this is very wrong, because as long as women are not out there and doing their duties and interacting with the local population, then we will not achieve what is intended. So instead of using deploying women just to say I've got 50% of women, but now that reduces even the number of the men that could be going on patrol and covering a bigger area, then you end up losing and putting your soldiers or the troops in danger, firstly, and their security is compromised. So it is important that even the ministers, our ministers of defense, that is what our ministers doing before the deployment. she checks everything. Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula, Minister of Defense and Military Veterans in South Africa. And if the numbers do not balance, she sends it back. It has to go back so that we deploy women who are qualified. I've listened to and Kristen and Mem, I'm honored. I just feel like standing up and saluting you right now. You know, it's women like that who really contribute so much, and they should be an example and showing that the deployment of women in peacekeeping operations really has a positive impact, and it's an essential operational enabler. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Pearl. That's great. And very quickly, because we're running out of time, can I move to Andrew? Oh, and Andrew, just very quickly, I know you have proved that you are a very strong advocate for gender equality and more women in peacekeeping. Can you tell us about some of the practical things you are doing to rebalance what is still a male-dominated world and what challenges you are experiencing? Thank you.
Yep, thank you. If I start at the top of the pyramid, when we look at the number of women police officers that we have, they're a scarce resource. And we noticed that we were interviewing them and rejecting them at too high a rate. And whether you're a man or a woman, as an adult learner, you really don't like failing, and we were losing them. So the question was, why were these well-qualified, educated women officers of the appropriate rank not being recruited, selected for positions? And we found a very simple catch-22 situation, that most of them did not have mission experience. And without that mission experience, as Anne-Christine mentioned, we have our own meta language, and are you part of the club? So the only way of being a part of the club is by being on a mission. But the only way you can be on a mission is if you have prior experience, so on and so forth. So what we did is, with a sizable amount of funding from Canada, and I just mentioned this because without resources, you know, you can have wishes, but they quickly turn to nightmares. The only way to actually invoke the dream is with resources. We brought together a number of high-ranking women police officers, academics, police services, and we said, how do we develop a course? You know, how do we artificially create the conditions that have allowed a small number of women officers to gain leadership positions, not only in the UN police, but in other regional and sub-regional organizations. So we created a course which looked at, firstly, what is UN police? And we have our own doctrine. And if I can just share this with you very briefly, we actually introduced this, and we had 192 women officers ranked from lieutenant colonel to major general that all met our minimum educational experience requirements. They signed that they would be willing to deploy to a peace operation, and most importantly, their member states supported them, saying they would nominate them for a position. So all of those barriers had been opened before we even started. The women came onto the course, and we said, you are the first group to actually be tutored by the UN in what is our new doctrine, the SGF, to say this is not a domestic, regional, or national approach to policing. This is the UN's approach, which will become the performance indicator for both you and the men and women serving under you. So from that, we then went to the question that Anne-Christine mentioned, the application. Men tend to look at a vacancy and see all the things that they have. Women tend to look at the vacancy and see all the things that they don't have. You know, that's a generalization, but unfortunately it's true. The other thing is the language of the vacancy. That the language, even a language such as English, which doesn't have a gender prefix like many languages, we found that if the language is masculine, it deters women candidates. However, if the language is feminine, it attracts female candidates, but does not deter men. So we looked at our vacancy announcements to make sure that they had either neutral or feminine language, and there's a number of websites which allow this to be done very easily. So then, how does one fill out the application? So we actually, with our 192 candidates, we went through their application forms and provided them guidance on, it's not sufficient to say senior police officer, assistant chief constable. It needs to be unpacked. Then, in lieu of international experience, we mentored them on how to translate their domestic experience so that it would be relevant to the international circumstances and the conditions that they would be expected to work in. So much of the interstate conflict is inter-ethnic. If you're a police officer in a major city anywhere in the world, it's likely that you have, ethnic minorities, religious minorities. You work with these communities on a daily basis. How do you do that? Next part, the written test. What do we expect in answers? And then thirdly, and most importantly, the competency-based interview. We set up mock interviews and for the first time ever provided feedback to the candidates on what they did well, what they did okay on, and where they needed to improve. We then gave them a couple of days and re-interviewed them. Every single candidate improved. So from this 192 officers that we trained in 4 regional trainings, we now have what we call our UN Command cadre, which is 170 women officers from 56 countries, which we can have as a pool to consider every time there's a vacancy for what we call the D posts, the director posts, the P posts, the professional posts. And we're starting to see a number of these officers come into UN service. We didn't want to stop just with the creation of the cadre. And just a couple of weeks ago, we began our first series of further professional webinars where we're doubling down on not only the professional development of these women candidates, but also exposing them not only to the Department of Peace Operations, but the other UN agencies, funds and programs such as UNDP, UNODC, the SIG. Whilst they represent 170 well-qualified women police officers, there are also project managers, finance experts. These are well-educated women candidates, which can be used both in police and non-police related activities. So that's, perhaps a short way of saying how we are looking to move the pendulum, and to say by saying, what is the problem? How do we address it, in the most, I would say, precise manner, rather than a shotgun approach. We're looking to actually ensure that our female command cadre is fully employed, and that will help us achieve parity at the top. And as colleagues have said, these role models are more than just symbolic. They have a practical application on the nature of the mission, the atmosphere in the mission, and the culture of the mission. There's a short video on the cadre, which is on our Facebook page. So again, if you look there, you can learn more about the cadre. And then finally, I think the other part of this is male mentors. Until we see gender parity, there is going to be a disproportionate obligation on men to mentor their female subordinates, to bring them up and to say that we need a disproportionate approach because the playing field is not level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It was very interesting that Rachel talked about how her biggest hurdle was actually getting onto the mission in the first place. And I just wonder if maybe the military side could take a leaf out of your book and look at how to help women on the military side to deploy. We've now come to the end of our time for the panel, and we now want to move to our young lady, Natalie. Natalie is a member of the Young Women's Alliance within the National Alliance of Women's Organisations in the UK. She's a student at Stroud High School in the UK, studying for her A-levels, and is planning to go to Bristol University and take a degree in psychology, and following that to join the UK Army if all goes well. Natalie is going to now present to you. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you. Just want to say hello everybody and thank you for taking time to listen to me today. My name is Natalie Hayward and I'm currently a youth advocate for NAWOL, National Alliance of Women's Organisations. I'm interested in talking about women's role within peacekeeping, because at some point in the future, I hope to join the army, and it would be a privilege to participate in UN peacekeeping. And I feel passionate about sharing my role models and with younger women and girls. When I first started researching women within peacekeeping, I was surprised at the statistics on women's participation. For example, the current statistics on women's participation in UN peacekeeping show that women make up 5.75% of military peacekeepers and 17.55% of police peacekeepers. I completely believe that these statistics will increase, and I believe that it must change as women have such a positive impact on peacekeeping missions. For example, they improve operations and performance, they help to build trust and confidence in the communities of the women they are protecting, they prevent and reduce conflict and confrontation, they help to identify future role models for young women and girls. One thing that women in peacekeeping missions achieve is identifying future role models, and on this panel we have role models. I have chosen to talk about two of my role models, Margaret Anstey and Major General Cheryl Pierce. These women are inspirational and truly embody female empowerment. They have shown the world that women can do the job to great success just as well as men. The United Nations plays its own part in showcasing role models within peacekeeping. For example, the Military Gender Advocate of the Year Award, which we've just heard about. Margaret Anstey served within the UN for 4 decades and rose to the rank of Under Secretary General in 1987. She was the first woman to hold this position. She was also the first woman to head a UN peacekeeping mission. From this, she went on to have responsibilities in a number of disaster relief operations. Margaret Anstey and her colleagues provided aid to many countries, including the Mexican earthquake in 1985 and the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1991 to 92. She positively impacted so many people's lives, which they will never forget. Margaret was also involved in the design and implementation of several major reforms within the UN system, and helped to allow women to access jobs within peacekeeping with greater success. Major General Cheryl Pierce was the force commander of the United Nations Peacekeeping Force in Cyprus. During one of her deployments, she led over 800 military personnel to overcome the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, ensuring peacekeeping force in Cyprus were able to continue contributing to peace and stability. She didn't just succeed, but she excelled in showing women all over the world what they can achieve, that they can achieve anything, even in difficult situations such as COVID-19. These women are inspirational, but they aren't widely known across the general population. One of my favourite quotes from a song is, "How are we supposed to know we can do it if none that looks like us makes it? How are we going to encourage and motivate future generations of young women from around the world to join and contribute towards peacekeeping if they don't know what peacekeepers are and who to look up to?" I want to do something about this. I can't change the world alone, but I can make a difference in the community I live in. I believe that information about the role of peacekeepers, military, civilian, and policing should be spread amongst young women and girls. This will make them aware of their own opportunities and have new role models to look up to. To increase women's participation within peacekeeping, we must start by preparing young women and girls to take part. There are many ways to do this. For example, there are police and sea cadets. These cadets have leadership training and interact with high-ranking women. This shows these cadets that women can partake in police and navy roles. This introduces the idea of peacekeeping role to young women and girls, making them aware of the opportunities available for them. I believe that another way to prepare young women and girls to take part in peacekeeping is to change the way schools look at careers. For example, schools stereotypically encourage girls to pursue the arts and boys to pursue STEM subjects and joining the armed forces. If we can change this stereotype within schools and society by encouraging girls to pick STEM subjects, it opens up more opportunities, including joining the armed forces or police forces. Another way school could help is by inviting role models within peacekeeping to come to schools and give career talks. We can also help by hosting Zoom or other online platforms to spread messages and ideas about women within peacekeeping. And we can introduce role models for young women to look up to. However, I am aware that not everyone feels comfortable about hosting such events, but you can help in smaller ways. For example, I'm sure each of you know and have had contact with the younger generation of women and girls. This can be family and friends or people you work with. You can tell them about you and peacekeepers and let them know what they can achieve. You may feel like you've only told one person, but that individual can tell their friends, and they'll tell their friends, and they'll tell their friends, and so on. Rather like a snowball rolling down a mountain. The longer it rolls for, the bigger it gets. So today I've discussed two amazing women who we should all look up to: Major General Cheryl Pierce and Margaret Anstey, and of course those in our panel. These women have such an impact on developing a new perspective on women within peacekeeping, and have shown the world that as women we can achieve the same as men, and that we will participate in peacekeeping just the same. Women's participation can and will increase in the upcoming future. I want to thank SecurityWomen for the opportunity to speak at this event. My being here is evidence that youth can and should be engaged in change. Once that snowball starts rolling, I hope it never stops. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. I'm afraid it's that your screen has frozen. I mean, my screen has frozen, so it's not showing the snowball. But there was a snowball rolling down a hill, which to follow on the analogy. That was absolutely great. I wonder if I could just hand over to my colleague Barbara now to field the questions.
Thank you. Thank you for all those amazing presentations and responses to questions. Now, I don't seem to have anything in the box at the moment in terms of any questions. So are there anybody out there that has a burning question to ask? Or if not, I'll jump in first while you perhaps get your thinking caps on and have a think. Okay, so shall I jump in and ask a question, and perhaps you might follow on from me and put something in the box, or put your hand up and let us know, and we can bring you in to ask the question. Okay, so we've heard a lot this morning or this afternoon about the talent that women bring to peacekeeping and to the military and the police and so on, and the importance of their roles and their presence there. But I've also heard conversations that talk about women, not being enough women in the pipeline to take, to step up into leadership roles. I've also heard conversation that women tend to leave and not wait for the promotion moving on up. They tend to leave early. And this is a bit worrying, because if these are the conversations or perceptions people have, I'd like to understand why that is. So I wanted to ask the panel, are these conversations that you've come across, and are they real issues for us, and what might we need to do to encourage more women and to actually come forward and step up, and maybe, as we heard earlier, maybe we do need a bit of a kick at times. So over to you, panel. Who would like to have a go at responding? Anyone?
Hi.
Rachel?
Oh, okay. It's
Pearl.
Pearl.
Pearl and then Rachel. Okay.
Okay, I just want to respond to the perception that there are no sufficient or enough women in the pipeline to deploy. I don't believe that is in fact true. Like, I think the challenge is information is not reaching the tactical levels. That is so far what I've experienced, that there are a lot of women that I know who would like to deploy, but when they firstly, I think that the flow of information from the higher HQ, from the UN, coming down to the last unit where there are well-trained women who would like to deploy, it does not reach there because of the return time that is being placed is probably not enough. But from my experience, there's a lot of women who would like to deploy, but they do not get the opportunity because information does not reach them on the ground, or for some or other reason, like for example, what Rachel said, that she received the information, but when she got it, when she responded, she knew based on her gender, she will not be approved. So it's as if we have to fight to be involved, but and the excuse comes out as we are not enough. We are enough, and I think the troop contributing countries also should consider having a pool where women are kept on a database of some sort, where if there is time for rotation or there's a need to place somebody on a post, they can take from that, because those are already competent and qualified women. So if we keep a pool that can be managed, for example, with us, it could be managed by joint operations, which is our environment where we deal with peacekeeping, so that there is a quick return time in terms of placing women in the correct position with the correct qualification. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Pearl. In terms of, yes, there's to be more transparency and more openness in terms of enabling people to understand that these opportunities are there. Thank you. Rachel, is there anything you want to like to add to that?
Yes, because I think that something that people are being tricked into thinking incorrectly is this business about there aren't enough women. If we look at the military, the United Nations is only 80,000 military troops, but we have something like 130 countries that contribute to that number of 80,000. And I haven't done the research on this, and a joke that I often make is it's easier to find out how many nuclear weapons a country has compared to how many women in the military it has. So I feel that if we could find out that sort of information, then it wouldn't be difficult to get to a tipping point of, say, 20,000 women peacekeepers in an overall military peacekeeping contribution of 80,000. So I feel that sometimes when we get hung up on percentages, we shouldn't be looking at how many women are back in that country. We should be looking at how big is the contingent's contribution to the UN, and could it put 20% women into it? I do agree that for a lot of countries, we don't yet have big numbers of women in the infantry. And from a military perspective, for peacekeeping, it is mainly the infantry which are deployed. But although you've not asked me this question, I'd like to share it. I feel that peacekeeping needs to look at the importance of engagement with the populations that it's operating amongst. Whenever we go on a deployment, we think about the worst case scenario. And of course, if we look at Mali, it's a very intense, highly kinetic peacekeeping mission. But we also need to be able to talk to the local population, and we need to train our peacekeepers, men and women, to be completely at ease with going into villages and talking to the people that they're meant to be protecting. And if you had more women in that patrol to talk to the men and women in those communities, I think it would be, we would get a lot more situational awareness and we'd be better at our jobs. So it's not just rethinking about women's role in peacekeeping, but it's getting all of our troop contributing countries to better appreciate the importance of talking to the local communities that we're meant to be protecting. And if I may, just very quickly, I think that we don't have too much of a problem about recruiting women. It could be a lot better. I think the challenge for most militaries is to retain the women. It may be that they get married or they have children and they want to leave. So just like we've seen industry and commercial organizations getting better at responding to people who've gone away to have a child and then come back into the workforce, I think that the military needs to be better at doing that as well. But they're my points. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Rachel. Can you elaborate any further in terms of where you think we are on the spectrum of how good it is in the military or peacekeeping and so on, in terms of being able to have a work-life balance and to be able to do both and do both really well?
Well, I think it's so much better than when I joined in the early 1990s. But I've still come across, unfortunately, some UN member states, they expect their women to leave the military once they get married. I don't want to name and shame any
No.
member state, but that clearly is something that needs to be addressed, and maybe the UN headquarters, and I'm sure it's doing this already, could encourage member states to think differently about how it retains women in their military armed forces. But I do feel that although it sounds like we're complaining, I think it is getting a lot better. But somebody asked me, how will you know that you've reached equality in the military? And my response was, when I see a deeply average woman as a lieutenant colonel, I'll know that we've made it. Because at the moment,
Absolutely.
when I look at lieutenant colonels and more senior women, they are incredible. But
Yeah.
I can find lots of deeply average men who are lieutenant colonels and above. And I'm not saying that I'm a superstar. I think that I was very lucky that I got promoted. But I want to see just more average people, more average women being able to be promoted, because at the moment you're promoted if you're absolutely outstanding as a woman, but for a man it seems that the bar is set a lot lower. You can just turn up to work and you're a good bloke, but if you're a woman you have to turn up and do a better job and never complain. But that could just be my own experience.
No, I understand those sentiments, and they're
Okay.
still very much there in lots of walks of life. So yes, no, I get that completely. Thank you for that.
But we are getting better.
I hope so. I feel as though we're getting better, but there's still a way to go. You know, whether we're talking military peacekeeping or in other organizations, we've still got a way to go. Okay, so I've got in the chat box, I have an observation from Kurt, and which I will read, and it says the UN policing developments Andrew is highlighting here, such as the SGF doctrine and recruitment changes, are positive indeed, as was Anne Christian's motivational summary of the benefit of understanding the holistic nature of SSR, and Pearl's eloquent description of the women providing operational leadership benefit on the ground. Is it now not the time to take such evidence and integrate international SSR governance into the national leadership and professional development curricula? So would anyone, Andrew, would you like to have make a comment on that observation from Kurt?
Yeah, thank you, and hello, Kurt. On the question of our doctrine, I flashed up the slide to say, you know, this is something which is not just for UN badge police, but the Secretary General has said that this is the policing doctrine for the entire UN system. And we worked very closely with regional and sub-regional organizations so that, you know, the AU, the EU, and other entities would be able to feel that it's their doctrine as well for economies of scale. So we're just about to launch a new UN police training architecture where we have training modules based on the formal guidance. So hopefully you will see this as a hierarchy going from the policy through the guidelines, through the manuals, and the learning outcomes of the training modules will then in turn become the performance indicators for implementation in the field, which then again will be used to inform impact, which will then feed back into lessons identified and, you know, this whole system. So rather than ad hoc train and equip in niche areas, one of the benefits of having a framework of doctrine, as Kurt is alluding to, that it goes from the patrol officer on the ground all the way through the various levels up to the line ministries, so that we have a framework not just for police, but for the entire internal security apparatus. And to say that this is not something which, you know, I have created with my team in New York. This is not something which has been created in air-conditioned offices in capitals around the world, but this is based on the 60 years of experience of UN police in some of the toughest yards, the worst places on the planet. And if it works there, this is a model which can go way beyond peace operations to support good policing. And if I may, when we look at the current civil unrest and the search for what is good and just policing, I would humbly suggest have a look at the UN Police website, because we have a vision of policing which is not only just and good, it's gender responsive, human rights compliant, and most importantly, evidence-based and field tested. It works, and it provides the only universal baseline where we can agree, are we above it, below it, or near to it, in the most objective form, rather than simply subjective approaches. And if I may, I just want to flash up on the screen again why we understand that we need women police officers. And it's not to be politically correct, it's to be operationally effective. So hopefully this encompasses the vision of UN policing, and to say that, you know, there is an integral part for our women colleagues to play here. If we do not facilitate their participation, overcome these barriers, we will not be as successful as we could have been. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Before I go to Kurt, because I see Kurt's got his hand up, and Christian, is there anything you would like to add to that?
Just a short notice on the last sentence, or the question that Kurt is raising. It's now not the time to take such evidence and integrate international SSR governance into national leadership and professional development curricula. Yes, and I think that for the police, this is a challenge. I can only talk for my country, Norway, and we have had, and we have a national director who is very much into international policing and prioritize it. But for chief of polices in Norway, of course, their priority number one is to deal with the activity home. The police are out doing operational duty every second, every minute back home. So that's their priority. That's what they are getting their budget and fundings for. So then the international policing and the international sphere is not a priority for them. And we have had very, very few chief of police in Norway deployed to mission area. So hopefully in the future we can manage to promote also the high level of leadership in the police in member states to go abroad, because I think that's the only way they understand also the linkage, because you can see that the world is getting smaller and smaller. The crime is getting overall, the crime doesn't see any borders, and when you are out in a mission area, that's when you feel it, you smell it, you see it. That's the problem. But when you sit back home in the north of Norway dealing with polar bears, you don't necessarily think about the situation in Mali or the migrant situation in Cyprus. So I think the police challenge is that we every single seconds back home deal with the priority number one task and duty for us. Maybe Kurt have something more to add. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask Kurt to unmute and to come in. We're right on the time now. So if you a couple of minutes, and then I think we're going to have to bring it to a close. Otherwise, we're going to get cut off anyway. So Kurt, over to you.
No, it's simply this. I think, Anne Christian, you talked about it then. Crime, the threat and vulnerability to our communities is a global issue now. So whether it be the cyber, whether it be organized crime, whether it be terrorism, or whether it be the mental health issues in our society, it's all globalized now. So my point to question, and I know Andrew knows this well because we've worked together for years, is that I think we need to get our understanding of international affairs today, we've got to get it right at home first. I think part of the challenge is we keep looking to fill slots in international policing when what we've not really done is been smart in explaining and starting to be more proactive in explaining why international affairs matters at a domestic level at home first. And if we did that, if you just take the issue, and I'll just finish with this, if you take the issue of our experience in leadership terms over this last year with the pandemic, in fact, what you see is the general success of women who have been involved in decision-making in this crisis. And we need more of this kind of thinking. We need people not to think that it's about whether you have the right skills and competencies. We actually need more leaders who can connect at the soft skills level, at the human level. And in fact, what you discover is, and what I've discovered in professional development over 30 years in leadership, is that some of the best leaders and best decision makers, in fact, are women because of the balanced perspective that they take, is my experience. And what I'm saying is, I don't think we have argued hard enough with at a national level, whether it be military or policing, I don't think we've argued hard enough to start to have international affairs and the issue of globalization built into our national programs. Because if we get that right now, today, in the next 5 years, and if we can start having universities running programs for youngsters, young women like Natalie, to be able to get ready to do peacekeeping without having to be linked to time in the field, if we get our education right at home first, I think we could make a significant difference in a very short space of time. But I don't think we've argued hard enough why international affairs in our domestic curricula, both in leadership terms and in particular, because I do believe that you, dear ladies, have got so much to offer in enhancing security. I've been involved in seeing the work you do, such as Pearl. And that's my point I'm trying to make here. Sorry, it's a bit long-winded, but I hope...
No. Thank you for that, Kurt. And obviously, yes, we need to get out there and we need to continue arguing and arguing harder in terms of our takeaway from today. And I'm sure we're all going to carry on doing that in some shape or form. So, okay, so we've kind of come to the end now. I'm going to hand back to Juliet. Thank you all for responding to the questions. And I just want to make, there's just one observation in the chat that was put in, and I don't have a first name here, it's SL Stevens, but just to remind us that UN Women runs a course for military and police and women leaders to deploy to UN peacekeeping missions. So just as a reminder, I just thought, I would share that with you. So thank you all, and back to Juliet.
Okay, thank you very much, Barbara. And I think it's wonderful that we have a man at the very end to actually promote the importance of women's leadership. And thank you very much, Kurt, for that and your points around the internationalization of it all. I would just like to say it's been a fantastic event, and thank you very much to all our speakers. I think what has come across is how very, very important it is that we have women as part of peacekeeping, and that it's not just based on, yes, it's sort of right to have gender equality, but it's operational effectiveness. And it's a hugely difficult, it has been shown by very many of our speakers how very, very difficult the roles are and how women have to be really at the top of their game to get anywhere. And we've got to keep on the fight to make sure we get the gender balance right. So thank you all, and thank you to all of our audience for joining us, and I hope you found it a useful event. Thank you very much, and goodbye.